هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى للخير هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى سيروا لنيل المنى.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. We start with the name of Allah. We praise and thank Allah for the givings He gave without Allah being obligated to give anything. And we ask Allah to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his wives, believing relatives, companions, and those who follow them sincerely until Judgment Day. And we ask Allah to protect the nation of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam from what the Prophet feared for his nation. Thereafter, in the previous session, we talked about the invalidators of wudu, and we mentioned about how they are categorized into four invalidators of wudu, and that the one who memorizes these as the scholars explain them, then it would be easy for them to recall all the matters that invalidate wudu. That among what invalidates wudu is anything that comes out of the eliminatory outlets, the penis, anus, or vagina, other than the ejaculated fluid. So if a person memorizes this, then they don't have to say urine, feces, gas, also if a person passes a stone, also if they bled, also if some other fluid came out, also if they had a discharge, also if they had, and count all the possibilities of something that will exit other than mani out of one's eliminatory outlets. Rather, they will cover all of that just by saying anything that comes out of the eliminatory outlets other than the ejaculated fluid. And that among what invalidates wudu is the skin-to-skin contact of two marriageable ones who both reached a state at which they are normally desired. And the third invalidator of wudu is losing consciousness by sleep, insanity, or fainting, except the one who slept seated with their buttocks firmly planted. And the fourth invalidator of wudu is the touching of the private part of any human, oneself or another, with the inside part of the bare hand without a barrier. And we mentioned that this also includes even one's non-marriageable relatives. After mentioning those important matters, the author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, started to talk about the obligation of istinja. And istinja is something that is necessary for the validity of one's prayer. So if a person urinated or defecated and then he didn't make istinja and then he went to go pray, his prayer would not be valid. Istinja is obligatory for any staining substance that exits out of one's eliminatory outlet except the ejaculated fluid. We mentioned before that the ejaculated fluid has a bit of a different judgment than the other matters that exit out of one's private parts when we talked about the invalidators of wudu, because we spoke about it not being a reason for one's wudu to be invalidated if one merely ejaculated without any of the other invalidators having occurred. Likewise, when it comes to istinja, in the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i, the istinja is considered pure. It is considered tahir, pure, and so making istinja from it is not obligatory. However, anything else that comes out of the eliminatory outlet, if it had moisture to it, then it would be obligatory to make istinja, because najis filth, these matters that are considered najis filth, it contaminates other things through its moisture or through moisture. If something was totally dry and it was touched by something else totally dry, and if some najis filth was totally dry and it contacted something that was totally dry, then that najis filth would not actually contaminate what it touched. Rather, the presence of moisture is necessary for the contamination to occur. For one to neglect making istinja, that is, for one to neglect protecting themselves from being contaminated with urine, is among the most common reasons that people will be tortured in the grave. So this is certainly a matter that is deserving of one's care and attention, so that one would avoid the punishment of Allah the Exalted in the hereafter. As we said, the moist matter, the moist thing that exits from the eliminatory outlets other than mani, that is what stains the exit and thus necessitates wudu for the validity of one's prayer. Thus, if hypothetically a person expelled something from their eliminatory outlet, whether the penis, anus, or vagina, that was totally dry, then istinja would not be necessary. But of course, that's not the norm. Usually when someone relieves themselves or excretes something from their private part, usually it is accompanied with moisture. And whether it's something totally liquid and fluid or whether it's something that is in fact solid but has moisture to it. However, so that one would know, if the individual excreted something that is totally dry, then it would not be obligatory upon them to make istinja from that. Istinja can be performed by water alone, just by using water, or it could be performed by a stone or what carries the judgment of a stone. When we say a stone or what carries its judgment, it means that the thing that one uses to wipe themselves must be dry and solid. It must be solid, that is, it doesn't crumble like a clump of dirt. It has to be dry, solid, and pure, meaning that one would wipe themselves with something that itself is pure and not najis filthy. Thus, a person would not use a piece of petrified feces to clean themselves, even if that petrified feces was rock hard, for example. But because that feces itself is filth, you do not use it for purification. The sheikhs would say you don't clean filth with filth. So it has to be dry, solid, pure, and it has to be uprooting. When one wants to wipe themselves, and if they want to make istinja merely by wiping, then they have to use something that is qali', uprooting, meaning that it has the quality, the attribute of lifting and removing the filth from the area, not merely spreading it or smearing it. Thus, what one wipes themselves with should not be totally smooth like glass. It shouldn't be smooth like glass, almas, because something like that does not have the quality of lifting and removing the filth. Rather, it would merely spread it. This doesn't mean that it has to be something harsh or sharp or anything like that or jagged, but it must have the quality of being uprooting. And when you find paper towel is like that. Toilet paper is like that. But also a stone is like that, as long as it's not totally smooth stone. And finally, it must not be religiously respectable. So if a person wanted to make al-istinja by wiping only, then what they wipe with would not be religiously respectable. That is, it would not be something that carried exalted names like the name of Allah or the name of the Prophet in reference to the Prophet, for example, or any of the other exalted names. Nor would it be something that contained Quran on it, verses from the Quran, or hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or any religious knowledge. Likewise, one would not use for istinja that which is considered human food. So if it's considered human food, you would not use it for al-istinja. You may know that there are some types of bread that if you leave it out for a few days, it gets very tough. It gets very rough. But you would not use this for wudu because it is considered human food. You could slice it up, for example, and put it in some fatouche. But you would not wipe yourself with it to remove najis filth. So if what one wanted to use was dry, solid, pure, uprooting, and not religiously respectable, then they could use it for al-istinja, for removing for wiping oneself after urination or defecation. If one wanted to wipe only, they were only going to wipe and not follow that up with water, then what they wipe with has to fulfill this description that I just had for you. If they're going to wipe only, they must wipe a minimum of 3 times because that is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ordered with. Even if the person felt like they got all of the filth with 1 wipe or 2 wipes, but still for the validity of the istinja, for it to be considered sufficient, if he's only going to wipe, he needs to add at least a 3rd wipe. If something happened with which 3 wipes was not sufficient to remove the bulk of the filth and all what is possible to be removed with wiping alone, then one would add wipes to that and continue wiping until they got all of the filth that is possible to be removed by wiping. Wiping alone does not get one as clean as using water. However, those traces that could only be removed with water would be overlooked. They would not harm one, and so the individual could pray with just those traces remaining. The best way to make istinja is for one to wipe first, removing the bulk of the filth, and then to use water afterwards to remove whatever traces remain. If the filth that exited went past the head of the penis to another part of the body of the man, then, even if it was on the penis itself, then using water would be necessary, and it wouldn't be sufficient just to wipe. Likewise, if the filth, it passed the area that is hidden of the buttocks when one is standing, then likewise using water would be necessary and wiping alone would not be sufficient. What we mean here is that there is a part of the buttocks that comes together when one is standing and is concealed in the standing position. And when a person squats down, for example, then this concealed area becomes apparent. If the filth, if the najis, that which came out, it passes the area going past the area that is hidden when standing and becomes apparent when crouching, and goes to another part of the body outside of that area, then likewise, wiping would not suffice. Rather, using water would be necessary. And likewise, if the urine reached the area that is the entrance of the the entrance of the woman for sexual intercourse, then this also would deem using water as necessary for istinja, and wiping alone would no longer be sufficient. If a foreign substance came in contact with the najis filth that's on the private part, then using water would also be sufficient. Will also be necessary. For example, if some oil or some vinegar dripped down and hit the place where the filth was on the private part, then it would mix with it. It would, if it hit that area, it hit that najis filth, then using water would be necessary, and merely wiping would no longer suffice. Likewise, if the filth dried up before one was able, before one wiped it sufficiently for making istinja by wiping, if the filth dried up before one wiped it, made istinja by wiping, then likewise wiping would no longer suffice, and using water would be necessary. And if the filth relocated from the place where it settled after the exiting of the filth, it settled and then relocated to another part after settling, then likewise using water would be necessary and wiping would not be sufficient. And when a person relieves himself, the filth is exiting their body from their genitalia. If after they relieve themselves, there would be some staining, some contamination on the exit where the filth came out, that is, it's settled, it's no longer moving, it is settled in that place. After settling, if the filth then relocated and moved again to another part of the body, then using water would be obligatory, and wiping, making istinja by wiping, would no longer be sufficient. In addition to that, something called al-istibra is recommended for some and obligatory for others. Al-istibra is for someone to take extra measures to clean out, to clear the exit from the filth. Like, for example, after a person urinated, for them to cough, to intentionally cough, to make sure that whatever remaining urine that was in their, genitalia or in the tract where it exits from is expelled. If the person feared that by leaving out al-istibra they would contaminate themselves with urine, then it's actually obligatory for them to do that. And if they didn't have fear of that, if they had no fear that by leaving out al-istibra they would contaminate themselves with urine, then al-istibra is recommended, meaning it's still better to do it. You would get reward, but you would not be sinful for leaving it out. With that, we have completed what pertains to making al-istinja. Inshallah, it was clear, and I hope that the benefit occurred, inshallah ta'ala. We ask Allah the Exalted to increase our knowledge, to make us among those who acquire the knowledge, the sufficient amount of knowledge, complete the obligatory knowledge, and what is more than that, and that we would implement it, we would live implementing this knowledge, teach it to others, and die on a state of perfect belief. Ameen. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim.
شغف لحسن لقاء وأشواق لجود عطاء.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي وفقنا لخدمة طلاب العلم الذين جاءوا من بلاد ومدن مختلفة حبا بعلم الدين. والحمد لله الذي سهل لنا برنامجا يساعد الطالب على الانتقال من مرحلة عدم التكلم باللغة العربية إلى مرحلة القراءة والكتابة والتعبير باللغة العربية.
When I first arrived at Elif, I had no experience speaking Arabic. I knew the letters, the short vowels, and some of the surahs from Al-Quran, but I definitely couldn't hold a conversation in Arabic. الآن أنا مرتاح وأستطيع أن أتكلم وأكتب ما تعلمته بالعربية. Our teachers helped us build and strengthen our foundational skills. First we started with letters, then we moved to words. وقبل أن ندرك ما حصل شرعنا بالتأليف رسائل لأهالينا, all while expressing our thoughts and emotions in Arabic.
With level 1, I have learned to protect my tongue from many mistakes in grammar, morphology, and word usage. The rules and fundamentals that were ingrained during that crucial year guide me to this day in my pursuit of knowledge in Arabic and religious studies. دائما نتكلم باللغة العربية في اللغة الثانية في كل يوم وفي كل حين. الأساتذة يذكروننا بالتكلم باللغة العربية. في هذه السنة ازددنا تلذذا بالحوار معا. حين فهمنا نحو والصرف انطلقنا إلى التفوق في التعبير والتكلم. والحمد لله رب العالمين.
أذكر أول مرة جئت إلى هنا لأبدأ في تعلم اللغة العربية، وكتبت أول امتحان. كان هناك سؤال: لما جئت إلى هنا؟ فما فهمت السؤال جيدا، فأجبت: جئت أمس ليلة. فسبحان الله، منذ تلك المرة حتى الآن كم من علم تعلمته وفائدة حصلت عليها، من تعلم المفردات وكتابة الجمل المفيدة في السنة الأولى. انتقلنا في السنة الثانية إلى الإنشاء وتطبيق القواعد الصرفية والنحوية. زيادة على ذلك، الأساس الذي بني عليه علمنا في اللغة العربية مكننا في فهم الأدب والبلاغة. فما شاء الله الآن صرت أستطيع أن أعبر عن فكرة واحدة بطرق مختلفة.
أي القصة الأولى التي
ما كنت أظن أنني سأدرس في مكان عظيم مثل هذا المعهد. تعلمنا كيف نقرأ ونكتب ونتحدث بالعربية في وقت قصير، لأننا ملأنا أوقاتنا بالقراءة والكتابة والتعبير.
Aside from the educational perspective, something else that kept me pushed to keep learning and sticking around is the community around this mahad.
The camaraderie between us and Elif is apparent. From the first day to the last, you'll never find a shortage of helpful friends and teachers.
Obviously, some days are more difficult than others, but with patience and encouragement from your classmates and your teachers, you realize that every step here is crucial to your success. والنجاح هنا سهل مع تفكير السليم والسلوك الحسن.
وكما تعلمون لدينا الآن في معهد ألف 3 مراحل. المستوى الأول والمستوى الثاني والمستوى الثالث. وإن شاء الله تعالى نعلمكم بأننا سنفتتح في السنة القادمة السنة الرابعة بإذن الله تعالى. إن شاء الله تعالى سندرس فيها ألفية ابن مالك في النحو، وندرس فيها الصرف والبلاغة والأدب والعروض من العلوم النافعة، فنسأل الله تعالى أن يوفقنا لهذا الخير العظيم.